All right, this is Wes Streeting in the middle here. So he's the health minister, I think, and they've just announced, Labour has just announced that they are proceeding with a ban on child puberty blockers, which of course has been controversial, very divisive out there. On Twitter, we've got Wes Streeting needs to be fired straight away. He is a danger to children. Every single Labour MP who claims to be an LGBT plus ally should be out speaking against the Wes Streeting ban on puberty blockers. No excuses. Dawn Foster warned us about Wes Streeting. I knew Wes when I was a student and he was the NUS president. Always been a right-wing lick spittle cunt. Wow, she sounds nice. More Wes Streeting. We've got fuck Wes Streeting. In summary, the sentiment is kind of a bit like this from like the trans side of things.
Not a surprise.
Fuck you! Fuck you, Wes!
There we go. Fuck you, Wes. That's what we're all saying. Just everything I scrolled down like on Twitter today, Jesus, like it's just his face over and over with like the angriest shit. Like, come on. If Wes Streeting has 1 million haters, then I'm one of them. If he has 10 haters, then I'm one of them. If he only has 1 hater, then that is me. If Wes Streeting has no haters, then that means I am no longer on Earth. So there we are. Wes Streeting. What's the point of a Labour government who continue the right-wing attack on trans people? What else we got? See, so some of it's positive. It's a very divisive issue. Some people are not pro trans kids, transitioning kids, should I say. And I kind of lean towards that side as well, because there's a lot of problems with like ascertaining consent and the fact that quite a lot of these kids that question their gender, they end up going through puberty and often that corrects the issue. They don't feel that gender dysphoria anymore. I hate Wes Streeting more than I hate Starmer, which is impressive on his part. So there's a lot of people sticking up for him. It's a very divisive issue. Basically, if they'd have committed to allowing puberty blockers again, there would have been just as big, if not bigger, uproar from the women's side of things, you know, the gender critical women, should I say. Wes Streeting can get into the fucking sea. Jesus. Anyway, so we've got Labour moves to ban puberty blockers permanently, and this is on GB News. So the reason I wanted to watch this is because I watched, who was it I watched? Matt something. I can't remember his surname, but there was a lot of like unfounded kind of conspiracy theories about what Labour's going to be like according to these like more right-wing kind of pundits and that, you know, it's going to be more woke.
I think we're going to have wokery on steroids for the next 5 years. And
there's going to be like, you know, stuff taught in schools, which doesn't seem to be the case.
Labour have said that they're going to continue to mainstream what we'd call gender ideology in the schools.
Starmer vows to ban gender ideology being taught in schools. And now they're kind of, something's happened that they're going to be happy with. So let's see if they're going to sort of put their suspicions on hold and get here with care, you know?
Kicking off this section with The Telegraph, and it looks like Labour could ban puberty blockers. How are we supposed to screw up our kids now? This is literal trans genocide, Nick.
Good point. And normally we like balance.
Sadly, there's people that literally say stuff like that. I mean, watch Essence of Thought, watch Bridgie Empire. Like, these people are insane.
But I agree with everything you said. Yeah, Labour moves to ban puberty blockers permanently. So Wes Streeting to agree with Tory ruling on powerful drugs for under 18s as party toughens stance on trans issues. So this is quite interesting, as Streeting has been pretty awful on this issue. He's done a U-turn, really, hasn't he? Seemed to be kind of like...
He transitioned.
Good point. He was sort of mockingly pro all the trans stuff before. He was like laughing at...
I don't really remember this kind of thing. I'll need to look into like Wes Streeting's history a little more, maybe.
Anti-trans people, I seem to recall. Please don't sue me if that's wrong, but I remember him sort of ridiculing it in the Commons and stuff. Now he's got on board with the Blair agenda to put woke away, which is where Labour's going. But it's kind of weird because Annalise Dodds is so woke on this stuff, and she wants it to be easier to transition. And she, when asked what a woman was, she said it depends on the context, which it totes doesn't.
That is something that like all left-wing parties seem to be having to contend with, or more left-leaning ones compared to, you know, what our right is, if you will. Because like the SNP had the same problem. So like Hamza Yusuf ended up being the first minister after whatever happened with what's her name, Nicola Sturgeon. His other two competitions were both they were both like very pro-TERF, like they were very gender critical, I guess. And it seems to be a lot of these parties have these kind of splits. Like there's been all sorts of stuff. Like the Green Party ended up kicking out any non-pro-trans members because there was a big divide there as well. So yeah, I mean, Labour's going to have to reckon with that, I guess. I don't know if they're going to sort of throw trans people a bone in some ways and then the puberty blockers is something they're taking back, or how it's going to work. But, you know, it remains to be seen. You know, there is definitely stuff I hope they will help with trans stuff, but I got to say, I don't know how pro I am puberty blockers, you know?
So Labour need to sort it out. It seems to me like Blair is saying put away the sillier aspects of woke, although the DEI, you know, diversity stuff is still due to Labour changes made on the Blair, I think. And if you go on the Blair Institute website,
DEI is due to Labour changes under Blair. Is that true? I don't know. I'd have to look into that.
Still say things like diversity is strength and all that kind of thing. But I think what Blair wants to do, and he said this,
it seems like it ramped up a hell of a lot, like during the Tories. I think it was much more a cultural thing, but who knows?
This Times article is sort of not be vulnerable on the kind of sillier aspects of the excessive aspects of wokeness, like the trans stuff. So I think that's what's happening here. They're rolling back, they're toning it down, no pun intended.
I mean, it feels like, I guess optically or whatever, it was like a no-brainer because I think the gender critical group and like, you know, concerned parents and stuff like that, I think their concerns are probably a lot more kind of, there's more weight to them in a way. You know, the trans people, they're not the ones with the kids. You know, we're talking about helping kids along to make very adult decisions with their lives that they might potentially regret. There's just a lot of problems with the trans perspective, but it just kind of seems to be a case of we want everything now. And there's no wavering on that. So it's like, you know, everyone's going to be transphobic then. Soon enough, we're going to have no one left except like the Green Party or whatever. You know, it's the Greens and the Lib Dems that are the super like pro-trans ones. And like, you know, where are they at? They're not winning any elections. So, hey.
Because of Blair and
the
Starmer.
thing is, when people start shifting, you've sort of got to let them, haven't you? You can't be all like, you said this a year ago, because we want people to come back.
Change their minds,
And you don't want the David Tennant type.
Well, surely you'd end up with, you know, whenever they're shifting the way you don't want them to, that's when you're like pushing on it. But hey, people change their minds. It is how it is.
Saying, well, I've done it to or I've allowed it to happen in my own family, and therefore I've said it publicly, I can't ever go back on it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we've got to, well, not unfortunately, I think we should be gracious about it.
I mean, this is a ban on, I think, private doctors and NHS doctors dishing out puberty blockers to children, which, you know, it sounds like it's just basic common sense to not unnecessarily medicalise children with the medicines that can give them, you know, serious, severe long-term effects. Particularly, you know, some of the people who've been.
Kind of my instinct is that he's like playing it up decently, but you still have to consider those risks, and it doesn't seem like the trans side does. You know, it's ignore any of the potential bad things that might happen, and only ever, you know, exemplify the good things. And the bad things that are going to happen is if they're banned, and it's kids are going to kill themselves, you know. So hey, I'm not surprised we're losing this one, because we lose all of these things, you know. It is what it is, and people wonder why I'm like not big on like the way trans activism works these days. A part of that is because stuff's just gotten worse and worse the more radical we've got, and it seems like we just lose on everything automatically now.
Medicated with this stuff weren't informed. They were told, oh, it's reversible. Then it turns out actually it gives you osteoporosis. There's a higher increase of cancer. There's various other things. It sterilizes you. You can never have children.
I don't know how true this is about puberty blockers. I think this is much more true about things like HRT, especially like a testosterone blocker. Like if you're taking a testosterone blocker and like nothing else, you probably would start getting like problems with osteoporosis and stuff like that. It's a risk to me because I'm post-op. So like if I don't take my hormones, that's a potential risk that I could get osteoporosis because your bones aren't being strengthened or whatever. I don't know the science behind it, but that's what I've always been told anyway. Maybe I've been lied to my whole life.
Children, it's horrific. It's, you know, it's all, in some ways it's the sort of thalidomide of our generation. But there's still concern that these drugs can be dished out by activists online.
Yeah, so Helen Joyce, who's the director of advocacy for Sex Matters, who's written about this a lot, she's saying that Wes Streeting needs to go further and rein in the private sale, as you just said. Apparently there's a company in Singapore that can send you this stuff. So it's not even the dark web, it's a company in Singapore. You can
Yeah, I mean, you'll always have like DIY hormones, you'll have, loopholes, other ways of doing it. Maybe they'll crack down on it. Maybe there'll be some kind of very limited access, during clinical trials. So I think that's what it is at the moment. But hey, the line at the moment is that this is like against the advice of the CAS report, which I don't know if that's strictly true. They're not necessarily saying in the CAS report, CAS review, fuck me, I've been getting it wrong the whole time. The stuff they've been saying in the CAS review doesn't necessarily say not to withdraw them, or to withdraw them, from what I remember. It's quite, a lot of the conclusions are quite non-committal because it's a review of studies, Anyway.
Buy these drugs online.
Yeah.
Man, yeah. I buy all my medical products from online activists.
Well, he says that, but like, I mean, Carefuls was fucking helping kids get, well, not even kids, I don't know how many kids she got hormones to, but she was bigging up and supporting some supplier of DIY HRT. You've got those ones in those weird like anime packaging and stuff like that. Yeah, I've seen them elsewhere, but yeah. Yeah, no, Heather Herbert was another one. She had that, she tweeted something like, it was like, if you're trying to get HRT and you're like menopausal, because there was a shortage at the time, it's like, instead you should talk to trans people who can recommend you less dodgy sites to get them from. Which, Jesus Christ, she was running for office, which makes the Sophie Molly shit all the more ironic, but that's another story.
I just pose. I want to get some steroids to work out in the gym. So I'm just going to pose as an 8-year-old girl who identifies as a boy, and hopefully, some blue-haired freak from Stonewall is going to send me some testosterone.
The only flaw is that you've just announced it on national TV, but otherwise that would have definitely worked.
There we go. I'll just see if there's anything else immediately coming up about Wes Streeting before I move on. All right, so this one seems to have that Debbie Hayton on. She's a like super trans woman who I'm pretty sure uses like male bathrooms and is like very, I'm biologically male. So like further than I'd go. Like I'm kind of transmed, I guess, but she's like very much so. Anyway, and then Alex Phillips. This is on Talk TV.
Now, just before the break, we were talking about all things free speech, and I happened to mention that a certain policy that has come out today from the Labour Party, this is the continuation of the ban on puberty blockers. Wes Streeting, the new Health Secretary, has announced that he intends to keep that in place. I was asking whether this would even have been possible were it not for people like J.K. Rowling fighting the good fight on social...
Yeah, you wonder. I mean, hey, the trans people help by continuously piling on her and giving her a huge fucking victim story, so...
media, because certainly for a long time the political establishment and the mainstream legacy media weren't allowing any dissenting voices on this. Oh, no. If you said...
God, she's laying it on thick. I've never seen this woman before. She's a bit much.
Surely teaching kids this ideology, bombarding them with all these questions about their gender and being born in the wrong body on social media, in schools, making it fashionable, all the advertisers joining.
Yeah, I mean, we have to stop pretending it's not like trendy at this point to certain kinds of people. And, it's something that people can pin their problems on. Like, we all love that kind of thing. That's what we're after, so...
In big corporations, sort of having pictures and adverts with, women with violent scars across their chests where they've had double mastectomies at the age of 16, that this was all something to be celebrated. And
violent scars, like, that's a bit much. I mean, they weren't like... It's not like mastectomies are, like, violent, It's, like, generally a consented thing that they do.
Wonderful, but you weren't allowed to question it. Oh, no. But thankfully, people on social media, particularly X, did question it. And then finally, we saw...
It's not that I don't agree with what she's saying, at least partly. She's just, like, really laying it on thick. Like, you can kind of tell which direction she comes from, like, very quickly. And, the language is very emotive. You get that on both sides, I find. The more extreme people get, the more emotive language they'll throw in there, because it's, they have to push their point as much as possible, I guess. I prefer if people don't do that, personally. I don't think it's necessary. I think it kind of coarsens the dialogue or whatever.
What was going on in Frankenstein's castle at the Tavistock Clinic, and all of these kids essentially having medical intervention for a condition which is psychological, and we questioned whether this is right.
Like medical interventions exist for like tons of conditions. You know, if you've got schizophrenia, you might be put on antipsychotics. If you've got depression, you might be on SSRIs or whatever. So it's kind of strange. Like, this is quite sort of propaganda-y in the other direction. And I'm not gonna, you know, just because it's from the other direction to what I normally kind of cover, I'm still gonna bear that in mind when I'm watching it. So, you know, media bias is really not a problem for me. I'm not getting sucked in by hearing this person describe like mastectomies as violent, you know what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. I wish people would give me like more faith on that sometimes, but it is what it is, you know. There's a lot of people that think that if you watch right-wing media, then you're, what's the word I'm looking for? You're like vulnerable to being like brainwashed into starting to think what they're thinking. And a common thing that when I talk to people about this kind of stuff is they tell me that I've been listening to right-wing propaganda, I'm being like taken in, and it's not about that. It's about finding the truth, which you're only really going to get if you look at all sides. So.
And what I would say is perhaps if Elon Musk had never bought Twitter in the first place, kids might be still being fed that medicine. Well, here to discuss this is Debbie Hayton, who's a trans...
Yeah, this is pretty like wildly speculative, to be fair, but the internet has played a huge role. Like, trans communities are formed necessarily on the internet because there's just not that many trans people. You've got plenty of them that live in like rural areas, especially in like the US and stuff. They're not going to see like another trans person, so they go online and then they meet all kinds of fucking weird people. Like, I'm at the point where I don't have kids and I'm not having any, but like, if I did, I'd feel like I'd have to like watch everyone that my kid is talking to on the internet, because I don't know who's going to be feeding them like bizarro kind of shit that's gonna get them all fucked up on something, you know. It's kind of terrifying. And if it's not like the trans shit, like the culty aspects of the trans shit, it might be, you know, fucking far right shit, you know. You know, you might get Steve Bannon from any direction these days, because it kind of basically works the same way. You know, leftists prey on trans people because trans people are super vulnerable, and, you know, a lot of them are in poverty, so it makes sense that they'd be, you know, brought into that kind of thing, you know. And Steve Bannon and his people, they preyed on like 15-year-old boys playing COD or whatever. So,
transgender activist and a Spectator columnist, and has been hugely vocal on this subject, a fantastic contributor to the cause, Debbie.
So unfortunately, I'm not going to get to watch anything with more of a trans positive perspective, because Debbie Hayton is not going to be that person. She is trans, but not in that way.
It's fantastic having you on the programme. I mean, thank goodness for Wes Streeting keeping this legislation in place, but it's a very different mood music to what was coming out of his party even 6 months ago, when people like Rosie Duffield, who stood up for women's rights, who stood up for children's safeguarding, were having death threats and bullying from people within the Labour Party.
I don't know anything about that kind of thing. Fuck knows. I'll have to take their word for it. I don't know what's been happening, but obviously things have started changing. And hey, the tide moved against us and we just got even crazier. So hey, it's just going to keep going. This shit's going to come crashing down. And you know what? Like, when it becomes so ridiculous to try and become trans because of how cracked down it is, because of the people taking all this shit too far, you know, it's going to be like the transsexual people who have like gender dysphoria and go through all the surgeries and stuff because that's just something that feels necessary to them. It's going to be them like holding the bag and like all the stigma of all this shit, and all these like crazy non-binary people, once it's not cool anymore, they'll just move on to something else. So you know, that seems to be what happens. Like, people take shit to extremes and then it gets heavily cracked down on. I think that's what's happened here, to be honest. Like, it seems a bit crazy that we're having conversations about transing kids and trying to make that like legal, you know. It's I can't see how like the trans side can't see the other side, and how they can't empathize with like parents that their kid comes out as trans at the age of like 10 or something. Like, to me that would be terrifying, because you hear about these like trans kids committing suicide and stuff, and you know, automatically you join the trans community, you automatically now have a much higher chance of killing yourself. That's just how it is, because more trans people kill themselves. So it's terrifying to me. And like, I can empathize with the parents, even though I don't have any kids. But so many like trans activists and stuff also don't have any kids. Remember, obviously most trans people are like, what's the word, infertile, much like I am, you know. And they don't seem to have any understanding for that at all. It's, you know, reaffirm the kid's gender, you know, support everything, so long as it's them transitioning, and anything to the contrary of that is transphobic, which I think is insane personally. I don't think it's like that at all. And, you know, going on Twitter, it's just like, it's just mad. I don't know what the fuck trans people have been turned into, honestly. Like, there's days where I'm just like, I want to like go stealth, even though it's not practical for me, and it's kind of dishonest, you know, just pretend that I'm not part of that shit. But hey, I don't know. I think anyone that hears me speak about this kind of shit would understand. So hopefully.
Well, I'm sure the bullying is still there, sadly, and other things will be still there as well, Alex. But the truth is that when Labour had to make a decision, they've decided on the side of science and reason.
I don't actually know what her political beliefs are. I don't know who she would be voting for.
Rather than pander to activism. And that's a very, very positive decision. In reality, could Streeting have done any different when Hilary Cass had said that there is insufficient evidence that puberty blockers have any benefit for children who are distressed about their sex? And the Tavistock's own research suggested that there was no evidence of any improvement to mental functioning through puberty blockers.
God, I remember so well, like all the kind of activist types that I knew, like locally. Like I pretty much have one or two trans friends at this point locally, and that's about it, because I drove most of them off by questioning shit, you know. It is what it is. But like, yeah, the amount of people, like even people with like big platforms running around talking about like how completely reversible puberty blockers were, and it wasn't true. Like it was, we were coming at this from like a bullshit angle. Sotal, I'm really sorry, Sotal, I don't know how to say your name. Hayton is an evangelical Christian, should probably vote Reform Conservative. Hey, maybe, I actually don't know. But yeah, I mean, she's going to be happy about this, so.
Could there have been any other decision made? The one which I think I was worried about and other people were worried about was the sit on the fence a bit longer. But it seems that Wes Streeting, at least, has come down on the fence on one side, and we should all be very relieved about that.
Yeah, thank you, Wes Streeting, who does seem to be breaking the mould of Labour Party established.
Yeah, these people are, they're really celebrating, Jesus.
Opinion when it comes to the running of the health service. But Debbie, how many young people out there do you think have essentially fallen victim to the medicalisation of a psychological issue that, you know, frankly, if people are adults and they want to make this decision.
She's a science teacher. It surprises me she's also an evangelical Christian. Not that I'm saying you're lying, it's a surprising like combination, unless she kind of converted later in life, who knows?
Then I think fine, by all means do it. I still think even adults deserve the protection and the care.
She's written for Spectator and Telegraph a lot on trans issues. Yeah, I've seen a few articles. Again, she's the kind of person I kind of keep the bias in mind, like, but then I do that for everyone. So I just try and understand where different people are coming from, so I can kind of just sort of decide for myself, if you get me.
Of health services and medical professionals before they make such a massive life-changing decision. But how many kids out there do you think have made this decision who in time are going to look back and say, my teachers failed me, my doctor failed me, the media failed me,
Hey, we're still yet to see like what will come of that, because we've had the first kind of, I mean, kids have been transing for like a good 10 years or so, but the numbers will have been growing up and up, you know, as it's been going on, and as we know more about the kind of medicalized side of like transitioning people pre-puberty, I guess. So you kind of wonder what the fallout's going to be, and what it would have been if we'd have gone the way of like the SNP, like under Hamza Yusuf or whatever, you know, kind of self-ID, presumably pro-puberty blockers, stuff like that. You know, you really don't know what might have happened, and I think it's probably the better option. It's probably the safer option. Keeping it kind of. Debbie has openly written about her own transition regret. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. There's Dutch people in their 40s now who transitioned after blocker usage. Yeah, there's probably a fair few people. I mean, you know, a lot of these medicines have been around a long time for other things, like it's for precocious puberty or something, when it comes way earlier than it should. So I can imagine stuff has been used for other things, like for way longer than anyone would think, but it's kind of more recently that it's kind of taken off, because, you know, the government wouldn't have even really known much about it, you know, back when that was happening, you know. So it probably happened back in the day, but just not enough that people would notice, I guess. I think that made sense.
Government failed me, and then essentially want to potentially fine those people whose job it was to safeguard minors and failed to do so. And then, of course, the British taxpayer will be the one picking up the bill if vast damages have to be paid.
Well, we do have to.
Yeah, I gotcha. But then, as I said before, like, so many less people were doing it sort of then as opposed to now. So we only know so much, I guess. And that doesn't, I don't know if that necessarily means because of certain cases of people going on to live long, happy lives. It's more about that not everyone necessarily will,
I wonder how many future cases there would be of historic abuse being brought against the health service for this. And the health service must be aware of this and should be aware of this. I think it's hard to say how many children have actually been medicalised to the point of their puberty being stopped and everything put on hold and dashed across sex hormones. Some have, and that's a tragedy. But many, many more have been sold this.
Yeah, see, again, she's laying it on quite thick. I don't know, I'd sit there being like, every child that's transitioned is like a tragedy, because it depends on the child, I guess, but...
This idea that there is this magical treatment that will solve all their problems, this panacea for all their ills, and it's just not true.
I gotta be honest, I do feel, especially on TikTok, that people do kind of put it across that way, that they have these like magical transitions, like Dylan Mulvaney and people like that. But yeah.
But what impact that's had on their mental health and their psychological development, who knows? And there's those issues, there's those conditions, and there's those issues which we need to be concerned about as well.
Do you think that it's not only the case that, that of course there are genuinely dysphoric kids, that is going to be a fact, but there's also going to be kids with other, I don't want to say impairments or conditions, who have various neurodivergent conditions, let's say.
She just about managed to be PC then.
Autism, Asperger's, so on and so forth, who have been fallen into the trap of thinking they've got gender dysphoria. And then I think there's
fallen into the trap. That's a pun, that is.
Likely to be another cohort of young people out there who, because they've been told that it's trendy and it makes you special and it gives you an identity, it separates you from the pack, it gives you a sort of...
I think the thing that sucks is, like, this sounds very, like, inflammatory, but we don't really know how many of these kids have, like, ended up online and ended up talking to people that seem to mostly be in it for, like, recruiting more of them, It's kind of strange. And, like, I think... Trendy, lol. They used to say that about being bi, lol. I think we have to accept that in some circles it is very trendy, and there is a lot of social clout to be gained from transitioning. It is practically like the next step of like a fashion movement almost, because like bi people don't really look a certain way. You know what I mean? Like they're not, it's just their sexuality, whereas they're kind of taking on all these things, and like there's a very like specific fashion sense. So like it makes more sense, I think, especially when, taking on trans identity for some people, it doesn't actually mean changing anything about them at all, which I don't agree that they're trans, but I don't know. I think we have to like bite the bullet and accept that there is like a trendy element. It doesn't mean it's for everyone. And it doesn't mean that every single person is just following a trend and it's just cool now and that's why people do it. Which circles? Most people's transitions mean them losing social circles and being ostracized. Was your transition that easy? I never really had friends in general. So yeah, I'm not really a good like measuring stick. I mean more like online circles, like very progressive circles, things like trans circles. I think there is like social clout to be gained from that kind of thing, and there are kids that will just do things because their friends do it. Like we can accept that happens without saying that that's what trans is, because it makes no sense for loads of people that they were doing it as like a fashion trend. I completely agree with that. And I agree with gender dysphoria being a thing, because, I mean, look at me. But I think we have to accept that this kind of shit does happen as well, especially the more visible it's got and the more people are trans, and the more it's kind of just everywhere. It's like, Pride Month. I guess it wasn't that bad this year, but like it was everywhere, last year and stuff like that.
Of augmented sense of value in society if you have something like
Well, it's difficult to get evidence because we don't really know what kind of people all these people have been talking to. I mean, the evidence really is the kind of bizarre, like, communities that crop up on the internet is what I'd say, you know? Some people want in on that kind of thing. Some people are so lonely that they'll change anything about themselves just to have, like, a community and people to be around. Like, unfortunately, it's just part of human nature. But yeah, I mean, it is difficult to provide evidence for, I do accept that, but I don't know, we can't just assume it's not happening unless we get literal evidence, if you know what I mean. There's shadowy people convincing others to be trans on the internet? Laugh my ass off. Hang on, just give me one sec. Excuse me. That isn't what I said, to be fair. Like, let's not rephrase each other. To be fair, I don't know that that's not, like, true to an extent. I mean, you know, any questioning person goes on the internet, they end up in, like, trans circles, like, asking about it. They're gonna get all kinds of strange information, you know? So I think, and there's so much propagandizing around it as well. You know, all this kind of stuff about egg cracking. Like, I think if you look up, like, egg cracking, cracking eggs and stuff like that, that almost is kind of what you just said in a way.
Like this, that probably had nothing, I don't want to use the word wrong with them, but had no cause to be concerned about having suspected dysphoria at all, but have done so to essentially run with the pack.
Well, yes, children like to belong to crowds or groups or tribes almost.
It would be, like, very against psychology if trans was a special area where it's never, like, fashionable between friend groups and stuff like that. I think that's unrealistic to assume. But you can believe that that kind of thing happens whilst also believing that plenty of them are just dysphoric and that's just what happens. What you're saying is internet jokes are misleading children into doing HRT ec. I mean, I'm not really saying that. It's an in for some people, for sure. And I don't know that they're all jokes. Like, if you think they're all jokes, then fair enough. I disagree. I don't think all of them are.
And
well, not necessarily. It depends what kind of identity they take on. Plenty of people that take on trans identities don't even take HRT. Like, I do know this shit, you know?
this is one which is painted as a very friendly group, all happy, smiley, rainbows, sparkles, everything. Come and join us. But I think we should move away from this idea that there are transgender people as such, and it separates transgender people off for a start. And we can't know who those people are, and especially as youngsters, and really ought to be looking at saying there is some treatment here. It's quite profound treatment, is gender reassignment, quite serious treatment. There are perhaps a small number of people whose lives will be improved by this treatment, but we can't know which children will grow into those people.
That is a question of how do we know which are the ones that are dysphoric and which ones are, you know, not so much. It's a very difficult one. Like, with adults, for most, like, more liberal-minded people, it's quite simple, you know, you really should have the right to do what you want with your body. But with kids, it's just so much more complicated, like gauging consent and stuff like that. You don't know that you're not going to be picking the ones that, you know, they're going to be regretting something in, like, 5 years' time when they're, like, 20 and they've had, like, a mastectomy, you know. Well, have fun. Gonna peace out, as this is just you agreeing with the videos whilst pretending to be skeptical, if you say so. They're putting out protocols of the Elders of Zion level propaganda nonsense. It's nice that you think. It's nice that you think you know how I think, because that's not really what's happening. I've barely even been paying attention because I've been fucking arguing with you. But hey, have fun, you two. I would probably end up blocking you if you stayed anyway. So.
And for children, the message should be,
okay, well, you're just talking bollocks, so you know, have fun.
is when you're an adult, when you know what it means to be an adult, when you are fully developed cognitively.
I mean, I will say, you know, it's not like you're answering any of the stuff that either these people or I'm saying, so unless you actually have some answers for those questions, you're really just wasting your time, honestly.
Then perhaps you can look at these treatments. But for now, you need to grow up and find yourself and find satisfaction within your own sex, because the idea that a magical treatment will solve all your problems, which I think has been sold to youngsters, is just not true, and it's wrong to try and give children that message.
Now, Debbie, before I let you go, I've been asking myself the question, where did this all come from? 10 years ago, 5 years ago, we weren't talking about this. Kids weren't talking about gender reassignment surgeries. We didn't have trans activists. We didn't have men trying to compete in women's sports. It was.
I think there was plenty of that going on. It just, it wasn't much at the time. When I say plenty of, it wasn't much. So it kind of went under the radar. It's just not anymore, which, hey, could be an argument against increased visibility. To be honest, I think that probably hasn't helped in some ways, but hey, visibility has pros and cons. Anyway, that's I'm kind of bored by this, to be honest. That's Wes Streeting